The Group Practice Boss Conference tickets are on sale now. We expect them to sell out in just a couple days. There are only 120 of these available. Head on over to practiceofthepractice.com/conference to read more and grab your ticket. This is the Practice of the Practice podcast with Joe Sanok, session number 1126. Welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast. I'm Joe Sanok, your host, and I am so excited that you are hanging out with me today. Today, we are giving you behind the scenes in regards to our membership communities. And so a lot of our consultants are doing teachings every single week. Every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, we have live teachings going on in our membership. So we wanted to give you a little behind the scenes. So we're going to be hearing from Nicole Ball, talking about what to do when referrals are slow, HR basics with Andrew, client retention with Ashley, scaling with Nicole Ball, choosing the right project management systems, and all sorts of other things over the coming weeks. I can't wait to dig into this with you. If you want help from one of our consultants, please head on over to practiceofthepractice.com/apply. I'll chat with you for 30 minutes to determine if one of our membership communities or consulting might be right for you. Now let's get started with this episode.
For those of you who were here the last couple weeks, this is going to be part 3 of a series for Group Practice Boss. I don't have a PowerPoint like I did last week, so I know that it was kind of fun, and I got some great comments and feedback from folks who liked having the content on slides. As most of you know, I'm a professor at a university, so it's kind of my jam to have some level of presentation. I don't have that today. So today is going to be more of the traditional chat and, just providing you information about what's worked for me in my group practice, and hopefully get some ideas from all of you too, because if you've been to my webinars, you know that I appreciate some good old fashioned collaboration and involvement from the folks who are joining us today. So, If you've never been with me before, my name is Nicole Ball. I am a group practice owner in Northern Michigan. I currently have 3 locations in Northern Michigan and hoping to open the 4th here in the coming months. I'm a $1 million practice, which means the practice revenued over $1 million last year, and we're looking at close to $2 million for this year. So we're really super excited about that. And the information that I share in these webinars is what's worked for me. And I always say that because, as you know, just like the clients that we work with, what works for one client doesn't always work for another. So I'm giving you information about what's worked for me, grow my practice to where it is. And, certainly what's worked. Hi, Barbara. Thanks for coming today. So that's a little bit about my background and information. I'm excited to be part of Practice the Practice, and especially part of Group Practice Boss, and those of you who are working to grow your group practice and see how big you can get it, and certainly dependent on how big you want it to get, because that's always a good topic as well, is how big is too big, and then how big do we want to get. But that's for another day, and that's for another webinar maybe. Hi, Corey. Thanks for coming today. All right, so today's part 3 of our series regarding effective communication and development of a trustworthy team and delegating responsibilities. All 3 of these topics are really important for this series, simply because I think that when we get going with the growth that we have in our practices, we really tend to keep doing what's always worked. That whole adage of like, well, it's the way I've always done it and it's what works, so we're just going to keep doing what works. Until we recognize that there's a more effective or efficient way to do things, we'll keep doing things the same way because that's what's comfortable for us. And that's what keeps the ball rolling. Something you've heard me say the past 3 weeks is, well, we can keep that ball rolling, but we can make the ball a lot bigger and make ourselves a lot more money and have better relationships with our clients and clinicians and our communities when we try new things and we put ourselves out there. So that first webinar about, delegating responsibilities, we talked a lot about really identifying what responsibilities you have, what's taking up your time, what are you spending all of your time doing, and how and when to start delegating those to other people that you bring onto your team or other people who are already on your team. And then asking yourself too, what am I doing with my time that maybe isn't necessary? Maybe I have some policies, some procedures, some tasks that just aren't necessary with the growth that I've had, or are tasks that we can give individually to our clinicians and maybe aren't an administrative duty as they were before. So that's what the first webinar was about. Last week, we talked a lot about building a team and building a trustworthy team and what's necessary to not only build a trustworthy team, but to keep a trustworthy team and kind of how to handle those issues that might come up. Something that you may have heard me say kind of over and over last week. Hi, Sabrina. Good to see you today. Something you may have heard me say last week over and over was transparency. Transparency. Just be transparent. Put it all out there. And as I stated last week, I do get a lot of feedback from folks that say like, ooh, be careful with transparency because you don't want to show all of your cards. You don't want to share too much behind the scene. My argument with that is transparency builds trust. And if you want trust from your team, you have to show them your vulnerability and transparency in that, and so that they'll trust you, and then they will be able to come to you when it's necessary. So this week then is the last part of our 3-part series. Today we're going to be talking specifically about effective communication, and again, what's worked for me in my group practice for setting expectations and providing feedback to folks. Now, again, this is only what's worked for me. So as always, I love to get ideas from the folks here. And I will tell you, I've gotten some good feedback from people saying that they like the interaction, or for folks who watch the webinars after the fact. Maybe they're not present, but they watch them. I get feedback that they like hearing ideas from other practice owners too. So I know there's great settings for that, but I figure why not put it here too. So I want to start with the whole idea of setting expectations. I talked about this a lot last week because the topic last week was trust and building a trustworthy team. And something that I mentioned last week is the importance of putting your expectations out there right up front. If you want clinicians to have notes done within 7 days, make that your expectation right off the bat. If the expectation is that your clinicians contact their clients on their own if they are sick, or they only utilize administrative staff, or they have a specific procedure if a client pays cash, whatever it might be, your expectations that you set up front have to be the expectations that you have for everybody. So that is my first thing, is making sure that you are consistent in your expectations with everybody. An example of that I have is when I was a smaller practice, when there was only 5 of us, maybe in one little building, sharing 4 offices, there was certain expectations that worked for that size of the group. And as we got bigger, as we got a new space, as we added offices, as we added a second location in the same town, when we grow to 20 clinicians, the same policies and procedures and expectations that worked for that small group need to change, right? With growth comes change. And so what I had to do is I had to change the expectation. So consistency is important unless there's a necessity for change, and then everybody has to follow that same expectation. So let's say that you said notes needed to be done within 7 days of the session. And that was the expectation from you as the clinical director, as the owner, as the supervisor. Well, let's say due to the size of the practice and due to maybe changing professional expectations, you want to change that to 5. One option would be to have everybody coming in new be 5. My point here is consistency is key. So you need to change everybody to 5 and be very vocal about those expectations. Now, I'm using notes as an example, but you can expect anything, whether it is the responsibilities of supervision, the responsibilities of keeping space clean, the responsibilities of having consistent scheduling or availability, whatever it might be. The point here is that your expectation that you put out as the director or the supervisor and the owner really needs to be consistent. I think one of the biggest issues sometimes that we have is we bend the expectation, right? because a lot of us are people pleasers. I am a recovering people pleaser. Not only do we want to people please, but I think we inherently as human beings want others to like us. And so we'll bend the rules a little bit, or we'll say, oh, don't worry, take your time on those notes. Or, yeah, if you need more time for diagnosis, or, oh, you can't make it to supervision, no worries. And we become a little bit laxed with our own expectations. Just like with our clients, and just like we train our clients to do, we can recognize that lack of consistency oftentimes will lead to people taking advantage, right? Or expecting that you are always going to be laxed about everything. And then that's when problems start. And that's when we have to have tough conversations. That's when we have to send those tough emails. That's when we have to request a meeting with somebody. So I'm just giving you additional examples about my own experience, but consistency has to be key with the expectation. Any questions about consistency before I move on to my next piece?
I have a question. So in terms of like, we'll use notes as the
Corey, it looks like you're muted. Or maybe, I'm joking. I'm muted. Hold on. I have my microphone muted. Oh my gosh, I hope that nobody was trying to talk to me. My speaker muted. Okay, I can hear you now.
Good. I was like, I hope not. That means my whole computer broke here. So going with notes, since that was the example, and that's also, I think, one of the things that I'm trying to get straight here. So what do you do? Like, okay, so you set the expectation. What happens if it's not met? I mean, like what? Well, I guess there's two parts to this question. First is like, how do you enforce it? Who do you have to track it? And then, if it's not happening, what do you do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the tracking is dependent on your size of your practice and how much you can handle personally, right? So if you're tracking notes, great. If your biller is tracking notes, somebody who's a clinical biller can track to see if notes are complete and signed. Usually with most of your EHR systems, you can run a report that shows notes that aren't signed and locked. So something I talked about last week is, I have my administrative person once a month run a report of all notes that are not signed and locked. Because my expectations are notes are signed within 7 days of the session. And part of completing the session is doing the note, and you do not get paid for the session until it's complete. So my clinicians don't get paid for anything until the session is completed, and part of completion of the session. So to answer your question, tracking is really dependent on you. Do you have a clinical director that's tracking? I mentioned last week, I don't track. I just have my intake coordinator once a month run a report. So she's a report once a month, and almost always 100% of the time it's somebody who saved a note and just forgot to sign and lock it. So very rarely is it somebody who's just like not doing their notes. Mm-hmm. I have come into a situation, which hopefully will answer your second question, where she was getting very far behind. Thankfully, she let me know though. She said, Nicole, I'm getting overwhelmed. I'm seeing 20 clients a week and I just can't keep up with my notes. And before I know it, now I'm 3 weeks behind. And it just feels like the mountain of laundry that I can't imagine putting into the washer, right? Like this is just too much. So what I did with her is rather than having like a reprimand, like, oh, well, you need to get your act together, it was, how can I help you? Mm. So that's the approach that I try to take is what do you need to be successful? Maybe you need me to help coach you on how to be more effective with your time. Because what I found out with this particular client, and that's the route I took, was coaching, she was spending 20 minutes per note, right? Mm-hmm. And my goal is 4 minutes per note. That's what I tell all of my clinicians. Your goal should be 4 minutes per note. And I try to, especially for those folks that I'm supervising, I try to make that the standard. It's 4 minutes per note. So if you're not finishing them in the 5 minutes between sessions, you are saving a half hour to 45 minutes at the end of the day and getting them all done by the end of the day, or you're saving a morning or whatever it is, but you're putting it in your calendar effectively to complete that 4 minutes per note. But anyway, going back to that, she was doing these huge detailed notes. It was just too much. And she was spending a lot of time on them. So the coaching came from, number one, coaching her on how to do notes more effectively and efficiently. And then number two, helping her come up with a timetable to get caught up. Because you know how it is. You get so far behind and you're like, I just can't. And you throw your hands in the air. So I help her come up with a plan where it was, okay, if you do 4 notes, per day, or I don't know, this was a couple of years ago. So whatever it was, then you'll be caught up by this date. And we're going to have a meeting on this date. So I gave her a deadline. Basically said, we're going to have a meeting on this date. Here's your plan to get caught up. So number one, she had a deadline and she was accountable for that deadline. Number two, she had a plan, which is what she needed because she was feeling overwhelmed. And number three, she needed some coaching, how to be more effective with her note taking and her note writing. So the coaching is one approach. I've never come across an issue where I've had somebody just blatantly not do notes or just not follow through with the expectation. In that instance, since we're talking about effective communication today, I really think it's important to first check in. Hey, this is what I've noticed. How are you doing? Is everything okay? And then number two, if I set a deadline, can you stick to that deadline? And number three, what happens if you can't keep that deadline? So effectively, what I try to do is make it very collaborative. Hey, this is what I'm seeing. How are we going to make this work? I've never had to reprimand anybody or never have to let somebody go, but I have had to remind people that it's in their contract, which is my next point in a moment. It is in your contract that these are the expectations. So is that helpful? Okay. Yeah. I do try to come to that collaborative coaching mindset though, because remember, folks coming in are not coming in with the same mindset always. And I don't know about you, but a lot of my clinicians are coming from the nonprofit world where their notes were so limited or, so detailed, or the expectations were either really stringent or really lackadaisical. Sometimes it takes just a little bit of coaching to help people recognize what your expectations are for notes. And then if you're billing insurance, what the note expectation is for insurance companies. Anybody else have a question about the whole idea of consistency?
Yeah. For me, it's kind of similar to Corey's situation. Like I have therapists, I think you kind of described both of them, Nicole, is very detailed, knows like is writing novels, and the other one's not getting enough information. And the one that's not providing enough information she gets behind. And I'm able to give her a deadline, like you suggested, and she gets them done by the new deadline. Like my policies, I need it within 48 hours. And she doesn't get paid until we get reimbursed by insurance, and I can't submit to insurance till the note's done.
Yeah.
So that there's that, but I'm just finding myself also it's exhausting having to I need these done by such and such date. One thing that's helped even with me is, especially with note writing, I've invested in, AI software to help with note writing, because even for me, as someone who has ADHD, it's helped me a lot.
Yeah.
That's helped some of my therapists feel seen and heard because it's helped them with their note writing, but still there's times where I have to keep setting dates. And how do I deal with that feeling of exhaustion of, okay, like this is now like the 5th or 6th time that we've had to say, okay, you have such and such time to get caught up.
So my next point that I was going to make is having your expectations in writing. So if the expectation is in writing, so if it's in your contract, whether they're 1099s or W-2s, and it's in your contract that they need to be done with, let's say, 48 hours, if you're consistently having to have that conversation, that's when I would bring up the contract. That's when I would bring up, it looks like this has become very consistent that you're struggling to keep up with notes. If you'd like to, we can discuss the contract, but the contract states that it's within 48 hours. And I just want to know if you can uphold that contract, and if not, what that looks like for you, and having those conversations. Do you have it in writing in your contract?
I do. Yeah.
Good. So with the question being like, how do I deal with the burnout surrounding it? I think if there's a way to delegate it to somebody else, great. But unfortunately, if you're the one having to do it, you're unfortunately going to have to be the one to say this isn't working anymore. Something I've done too is I've said, okay, it looks like we're going to hold off on giving you more clients until you can show that you can stay caught up. We did do that with one clinician last year. They were having a hard time getting caught up. And thankfully it was them who reached out. They said like, hey, hold off on clients. I'm feeling so overwhelmed. And then when I noticed late notes coming in later on, I was able to say, hey, do you need us to pause clients again? Yes, thank you. Please pause any new intakes. That might be an option too, is just discussing their capacity, right? Their capacity to see clients and do notes. And then again, some of the coaching can be helpful too. Like if your sessions are going right up till the 60-minute mark, like maybe we can practice taking it back to the 53-minute mark, right? Practice that so that you are guaranteed that time afterwards. So I don't know if that's helpful at all, but that's what I've seen to be helpful is that coaching model. How can I help you? But then if I'm consistently helping you and you're still not showing up, maybe it's time to be reminded about what's in your contract and really identify if this, maybe you need to go to part-time. Maybe this, going to work out long-term. And then also, I really like how you say they don't get paid until, because sometimes that can be really motivating for people. Because that one clinician who was so far behind, she wasn't getting paid anything. And so I'm like, you're basically working for free until you get those done.
I think that's a motivator. So, especially since I've, invested in software to help us all, progress notes are getting done on time. Now the issue is kind of just like termination notes and treatment plans, things like that. Those are kind of falling the wayside.
Yeah. Well, you're hopping ahead to my third point. So I'll mention reminders in a moment.
As a therapist, I can tell you from experience that having the right EHR is an absolute lifeline. I recommend using Therapy Notes. They make billing, scheduling, note-taking, telehealth, and e-prescribe incredibly easy. Best of all, they offer live telephone support that's available 7 days a week. You don't have to take my word for it. Do your own research and see for yourself. Therapy Notes is the #1 highest rated EHR system available today, with a 4.9 out of 5 stars on trustpilot.com and on Google. All you have to do is click the link below or type promo code Joe on their website over at therapynotes.com and receive a special 2-month trial absolutely free. Again, that's therapynotes.com and use promo code Joe on the website. If you're coming from another EHR, Therapy Notes will also import your demographic data quick and easy at no cost, so you can get started right away. Trust me, don't waste any more of your time and try Therapy Notes. Just use promo code Joe at checkout.
Okay, so number 1, consistency. Number 2, in writing. So when Brent asked, I mentioned it, but make sure your expectations are in writing. So in your contract, it's helpful to have a separate section of your contract labeled expectations for professional compliance, is what I call it. I only have 1099s. All 33 of my clinicians are 1099s. Thankfully, in Michigan, I can do that. Thankfully, I have a good lawyer who helped me draft my contract just so, because I know people, that can be a lot of contractors. But the language I use is expectations for professional compliance. So it's not about my rules. It's not about Nicole's rules. It's about, in order to be in professional compliance with insurance companies and with our licensure, we need to have notes done within 7 days. We need to have a treatment plan on file and updated every so often for our clients. All insurance clients must carry a diagnosis, and so on and so forth. So those expectations are in a separate section of the contract that they sign so that they know upfront what the expectations are. Not only is it good to have in writing just so that they know, but it's good to have in writing in case they decide to break that contract. So again, if you have a clinician who is consistent with not keeping up with those expectations, you have something in writing that justifies if you ever have to let them go, unfortunately. I've never had to let anybody go. I have a fellow practice owner across town who recently had to let somebody go, and that got a little bit messy and yucky, but thankfully she had plenty of justification for ending that contract because the clinician wasn't holding up their end of the bargain with the contract. That's the whole point of a contract, right? The whole point of a contract is to say, this is what the expectations are, and this is what you can expect, and this is what I can expect. And then if you don't follow through with that, I have a right to break this contract. And so that's where she was coming from, is if you are not keeping up with the expectations for professional compliance, or whatever, term you'd like to use, then this contract can be broken. So we don't like to get there though, right? None of us want to get to that place, but we also don't want somebody in our team who's going to make things harder for us that we're doing more work for, or who is hurting our reputation as practice owners, right? That's the big thing. So again, I always go for that coaching model, but having it in writing is that backup, that expectation. Not only are they signing the contract that has it in it, but I also have a new clinician email that goes out that reminds them of those professional expectations. And I do that because you know how when you sign a contract, sometimes you're like, oh, yep, I'm going to skim it. And then you just sign your name and you're good to go, right? They're not reading all the fine print or the little sections because they're like, oh, I know what I'm doing. I've got this. So every new clinician gets like a welcome email from me, like, hey, as a reminder, if you're the last one out the door, shut the lights off. So as simple as that, all the way to like, as a reminder, here are your professional expectations for documentation. And then I not only send that to them, but I CC myself as well. So I have a copy. So again, it's additional paper trail that they know the expectations up front. And there's lots of good, Practice the Practice has lots of good resources for that kind of stuff. Okay, the third thing that I have here for communicating and setting expectations is reminders. Okay, we all need a little reminder sometimes. So I have it written in my calendar quarterly to send reminders about random stuff. I'm sending one today, actually. I'm going to pull it up because I'm working on it right now. I am sending one today about hallway etiquette and reminding us to be quiet in the common spaces of the practice. Okay. Because we forget and we're ending a session and we're walking out the hallway with the client, talking about the weather or whatever, forgetting that there's sessions going on around us. So that's just one little example. But what I do is every quarter, every couple months, whenever it's necessary, I actually put in my calendar to send an email to everybody about something related to the expectations. So, today I'm sending the one about hallway etiquette and starting and stopping sessions in your office. So we're not walking through the hallway or talking to our clients out in the lobby. The last one I sent was about reminders of documentation. Just a reminder, 7 days. Just a reminder, do not submit for insurance billing to our biller until the note has been signed and locked. And a reminder that completion of a session does not mean meeting with the client and saying goodbye to them. Completion of a session means meeting with the client, saying goodbye to the client, and completing, locking, and signing the note. And I think it's just a helpful reminder because we're all human and we all get behind and life happens. And I don't know about you, but when I get that reminder, whatever it is, right, I'm going to pay more attention to what I'm doing. An example that I like to give on my personal side is, as most of you know, I teach for a university. I've been there 10 years. I've been doing it a long time. I love what I do. I love teaching. But I do tend to get a little laxed on letting students go early. And I've kind of built a reputation for it. Whatever. It is what it is. But I talk fast. I get stuff done. I teach them what they need to know, and I want to get them out the door. I was offered a friendly reminder, and it was to everybody, but who knows, it could have been just to me. A friendly reminder to all of the faculty in our department saying like, hey, as a reminder, when classes go until this time, you were expected to meet the full time of the class. And even though I knew that, and I knew I was being laxed with it, that reminder was that little poke that I needed to say like, hey, Nicole, you're letting students go pretty early. Keep an eye on that clock and make sure you're using your time wisely because students are paying for this time. And it's your job and so on and so forth. Okay. So even though I'm really good at what I do and I love what I do, we all get a little bit lax sometimes. So I like to send reminders about notes, about hallway etiquette, about cleaning up after yourself, about parking lot, about remembering to turn off the sound machines and the lights before you leave. I sent one out yesterday just about cash payments, because we've been getting a lot of cash payments, which is weird, but just, hey, we all know the protocol for cash payments, but just in case you forgot, here's the protocol. So my point being is, part of effective communication and setting expectations is not only being consistent and having it in writing, but doing friendly reminders, because I think it's a service to our clinicians and to ourselves to know that we are effectively communicating our expectations with reminders. Now, if you do need to pull one person aside to give them a reminder, that's okay too. It's okay to send somebody an email or request a meeting to say, hey, I've noticed when you've been leaving at night, you've been leaving the sound machines on. Just a reminder, these are the expectations. Or like the note example that I gave earlier. But reminders are not a bad thing. Reminders do a service to us and to our clinicians, because we're all humans. We all get a little lax sometimes. Life happens, and there's nothing wrong with reminders. So any feedback, questions, or stories, or anything anybody has on that about giving reminders to their clinicians or to their team? Now, I do not have meetings. Because I have 1099s, I don't do meetings. Because I have so many clinicians, and for us to have meetings that could be otherwise sent in an email, I don't want to waste people's time with that. So I communicate via email with all my clinicians rather than having a meeting. But for those of you who have meetings, whether it's weekly, monthly, quarterly meetings with your team, there's always room for a little reminder section in your meeting. So, hey, here's what we're going to cover today, but here's just a quick few bullet points about reminders about expectations. And it could be anything we've described today. Okay. The last thing I have about setting expectations is modeling behavior. So that's my fourth thing, is modeling exactly what it is that you want to see. So none of my clinicians are seeing my notes, but I have to make sure that I'm sticking to that 7-day or 48-hour or 24-hour, whatever that expectation is too. I have to make sure that I am being quiet in the hallway. I have to make sure that I am having professional communication via email. I have to make sure that I am making sure my clients are signing releases of information or getting their paperwork in before the session. Whatever the expectation I have for my clinicians, I have to make sure that I'm adhering to that same expectation too, because people watch you and people model their behavior off of you, especially when you have younger clinicians who are looking up to you. If you are supervising folks, if you are working with other practice owners who are new to the private practice game, and also when you are having folks come from the nonprofit world, and many of you have, right? We put in our time in nonprofits. If you're coming from the nonprofit world and you're coming over to private practice, there are additional expectations or additional policies, procedures, ways of seeing things that we're doing. And it is up to us to model what that is and what that looks like. If we're going to be laxed, somebody else thinks it's okay to be laxed, right? So modeling professional behavior and setting yourself up for following through with that professional compliance is important as well. Okay, so just to recap, for effectively setting expectations, we have consistency, so being consistent with your expectations, making sure everything's in writing. Don't be afraid of reminders, whether it's formal or informal, and then modeling appropriate behavior for those expectations. Okay, the next part of this webinar today is providing feedback. Now, we kind of already talked about that a little bit, and I talked about it quite a bit actually last week when we were talking about effective communication to build a trustworthy team. But I also think that providing feedback in a group practice setting means not forgetting that it's your practice. Okay, this is hard, and this kind of goes back to my little joke about being a recovering people pleaser, but I am. And I want people to like me, and I want my clinicians to look up to me, and I want to make everybody happy. But something that I had to learn very early on as my practice was growing is I'm never going to make everybody happy, right? I am never going to have everything just so that every clinician on my team is happy with our procedures, with the way things go, with the rate that they're being paid. It doesn't matter, right? I'm never going to be able to make everybody happy. And so I think that was a tough lesson for me to learn. But because of that, I also had to learn that I have to have tough conversations with people. And I have to be able to effectively communicate not only the expectations, but problems as they arise. The example I like to give for this is when I had a clinician come to me saying, Nicole, I think I deserve a higher percentage because I have training in this specific modality and I spent a lot of money to get this specific training and certificate. And I really think that I should get a higher percentage. And I thought about it. I did not shoot her down right away. But I had to remember that she might leave if I give her the answer she doesn't like, right? I had to accept that she might leave, and I had to accept that I was probably going to make her angry, and I had to accept that this is my practice. This is my baby, right? This is my moneymaker. This is my livelihood. And I think sometimes we are willing to sacrifice that to make other people happy and to make people like us and to make people stay on our team, right? So when it comes to providing feedback, whether it's with somebody who's not getting their notes done or somebody who wants a higher percentage, remembering, number one, that this is your practice and you get to decide what that looks like. Okay. With that specific clinician who asked me for a higher percentage, I said no. And I was able to not give her an answer right away, but I said, let me think about this and I will be happy to sit down with you and chat about it. I met and had coffee with her and I gave her my reasons. And because I had that week or so in between her asking and us meeting, I was able to, kind of in my head and in writing for myself, get everything laid out in terms of the justification for not giving her that higher percentage. And there were lots of reasons. We don't need to get into it today. That's a whole nother webinar for another day. But I was able to give her that feedback in a way that was true to what I needed to do for my practice. If I did it to make her happy or to keep her on my team, I would have given her the higher percentage. And then you know what would have happened? I would have had, because therapists talk to each other, right? I would have had every other therapist coming and saying, well, I deserve a higher percentage. I deserve a higher percentage. For whatever reason, didn't matter. Not that their work is not worth, but it is my practice and I have to set those standards and not worry about if people will like me, if they're going to get mad at me, or if they're going to leave, because you will have therapists leave. And that's okay, because there'll be another therapist to take their place. There'll be more clients that need to be seen, and it will be okay. Any comments about that? Has anybody else ever had to deal with that before, or similar situations where they've had to have those tough conversations and they had to remind themselves that this is their practice?
A couple of times. I think one thing I've had to do is, and it's again kind of frustrating, is reminding some of the therapists to go back and read the things that I've already sent them that explains everything they're asking for. Like I had one clinician, she's wanting to get trained in Gottman training and get certified in it. And she came to me, she's like, would I be willing to pay for half of the certification? And I told him, like, well, I'm not going to pay for half, but you do get X amount of dollars in a CEU stipend. She goes, oh, I do. I said, again, if you would go back and read the things that you signed and were sent, you would know this. So.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a good point too, is just reminding them. I have to do that with my students all the time. They'll say like, oh, can I do this? And I'll be like, did you read your syllabus? It was in there. But same thing. Did you read the contract? Are you getting those emails? Yeah, absolutely. Those little reminders are good. Anybody else have any tough conversations they've had to have? I also had a clinician decide to leave once, not because we couldn't get, we couldn't see eye to eye on something, but she just had a better opportunity somewhere else. And she came to me and, in a very sweet way, gave me kind of an ultimatum, like, hey, I've got this other opportunity where I can make a higher percentage. before I leave, I just want to see what you can do for me. And I did not want her to leave. I did not want her to leave, but I also knew that if I gave her a higher percentage, I would have to then give everybody else a higher percentage. And I was not at that time ready to do that in my practice. So when you're giving feedback, whether you are talking to somebody about their notes or not flushing the toilet, I've had to have that conversation before too. Stuff like that. You have to remember that this is your practice, your livelihood, and your reputation. So anytime you're giving feedback, remember that. Also, when it comes to that effective communication, come at it from an empathic perspective, right? We can understand how people get overwhelmed. I can understand that mountain of laundry or that mountain of notes that you get, right? I can understand having a client that you're not clicking with. I can understand having a hard time balancing 3 kids, 2 dogs in a practice that you work an hour away from, right? I can empathize with losing somebody. I can empathize with struggling with family dysfunction. And so I think when you come at it, giving feedback from that perspective of how can I help you? What can I do for you? Do you need coaching and so on? And then how do we make this better for both of us? I think is the best way to effectively communicate when you're giving feedback to folks. All at the same time, remembering that this is your practice, your reputation. That went by kind of fast. We still have about 7 minutes before I usually seek out feedback. So does anybody have any questions? And it could be something specific about my practice, about how I do things. It could be about communication or contracts. I just want to use our time effectively. So does anybody have anything they'd like to chat about or any questions they have?
You started to touch on how you mentioned like you don't have meetings because all of your therapists are 1099s.
Mm-hmm.
My practice were W-2s. I keep going back and forth on whether or not I should be having monthly or some type of regular staff meeting. Right now, my practice is super small. It's me and 2 other therapists. But for the most part, I feel like I can communicate most things in either email or in passing, especially since one of the therapists that works for me is also my spouse. So that makes communication a little bit easier. But should I be having regular type meetings, or does emails and just, in between sessions seem to, if it works, it works?
I think it depends on the needs of your team. I feel like it depends on the size of your practice and it depends on people's time. Are they getting paid for those meetings? Because if they're getting paid, that's one thing. My clinicians only get paid for their session, right? And so for me, I try to look at it from that perspective of, okay, if you're charging clients $160 an hour, that means your time is worth $160 an hour. That means my time's worth $160 an hour. And so what that means is if they're going to give an hour up, I better make sure it's good, right? And that's when I have to ask myself, is what I have to provide good enough for them to give up $160 an hour? So I think it depends on the content. If it is general, like, hey guys, reminders, I usually do a quarterly, like, hey, spring updates from Nicole, and I'll give like a little reminders and, always reach out if you have any questions. Don't feel like you're bugging me, that kind of a thing. But if it's something serious, let's say you're really dealing with a serious issue that needs to be addressed with everybody, or if you have something to provide. I know one thing that I did pre-COVID is I would have a meeting and then the first half would be just general updates. And then the second half would be a guest speaker to kind of tell us about a resource in the community or, a modality or some kind of a training or something like that. So think about it in terms of how much their time is worth. And is that time you're taking away from them worth what you have to share? So that's why I chose not to do meetings. The other thing is as 1099s, they can choose to come or not come because I'm not paying them for it. And I would only have like half the people show up. So I had to send an email anyway. So I found myself having this meeting and then sending an email saying, hey, for all of you who couldn't make it, this is what you missed. And I'm like, why am I doing this? And so to replace the social part of that, I do optional get-togethers a couple times a year. So like in the summer, we'll have an optional like, hey, everybody, bring your families. I'm buying pizza. We'll meet at the beach. And then we have a big Christmas party every year. things like that, so we can be social. And I've also added in like coffee hour. So like I'll have my office open, I'll have coffee made, and whoever wants to grab a cup of coffee and come hang out in my office and chat is welcome to. And a couple people have followed through with that, but to expect that everybody's schedules are going to line up on the exact same day unless you're paying them to be there is really unlikely. So hopefully that's helpful. Anybody else, any questions that I'm always happy to answer? Okay. Well, just remember when it comes to the expectations, and that's kind of what I want you to take away from today is when it comes to the expectations, just remember that you're the one setting the expectations. Be consistent, have it in writing. Don't be afraid to send reminders, and then be that good model. I'm going to stick around if anybody has any personal questions or anybody wants to chat about anything. But otherwise, thank you all for being here today. And I think I have another webinar series coming up in August. I'll have to look. So hopefully I'll see y'all again soon. Have a good day.
Thank you so much for listening to the Practice of the Practice podcast today. These trainings are available in our membership communities. Now, we're going to be opening up our membership communities more than just when we're opening Level Up Week. So if there's one that you are interested in, I would love for you to head on over to practiceofthepractice.com/membership, where there's more details and you can get notifications when those open up. So if you are in solo practice, just getting going, if you are building and sustaining a sustainable solo practice, Next Level Practice is for you. If you are looking to launch a group practice launch is for you. And Group Practice Boss is for all those group practice bosses out there. You know, we also couldn't do this show without amazing sponsors like Therapy Notes. Therapy Notes is the best electronic health records out there. They will help you switch over from your current EHR. They also give you 2 months for free or just money off if you use promo code Joe at checkout. They are phenomenal. They help with automated billing. It's going to make it easier to outsource your billing. So many reasons to switch to Therapy Notes. Just head on over to therapynotes.com, read about it, and at checkout, just use promo code Joe. Thank you so much for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music, and this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.